We're back, baby. It's the Charity Stripe and Horns Up, talking Texas, doing a little double dipping for the people today. Fisher, Tasopoulos, DJ, Nikki, Snacks, Crider. If you're listening on the mightier 1090 ESPN radio, shout out to you. Shout out to your family. We have a guest today from Southeastern 14. He is an expert on the SEC conference. He's a beast. He's been running rivals for Vandy for 21 years. Let that sink in, people. He's seen it all, done it all, been around Tennessee and back again. Chris Lee joining the boys. Chris, welcome, man.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Got you, man. Look, it's been a very interesting football season. We're Texas guys as we kicked it off, and we want to get through the breakdown of everything. But what's the temperature like from your guys' end with us coming to the SEC? Have we proven over the past couple seasons since our beatdown from Arkansas, have we proven, hey, like we've recruited well enough, we fixed our holes, we're here, we're ready, we belong, we can compete with the big guys? I know the win against Alabama is a very big statement in Tuscaloosa.
Well, look, I think it's hard to get respect from the top in the SEC when you've got, and I don't mean this disparaging, because I think Texas has got a historically great program, but you've got how many SEC teams that won national titles since Texas? Florida, LSU, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, I guess. If I got something out of sequence, let me know. But look, and that's more about the SEC than it is about Texas, right? I mean, it is a brutal league. You got a Tennessee team 25 years ago was on top of the college football world, won a national title after Peyton Manning left. Looked like they had the next dynasty. They've been in the back seat for the better part of the last 15 years in this league. Now they're getting back. Point being, it is a rough and tumble league. I do think Texas got a lot of people's attention with that Alabama win, as well it should have, and the way they're recruiting should get people's attention too. But I mean, it's such a beauty pageant, this league, week in and week out. It's just adding two more people to the contest in Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah. I mean, look, we'd be remiss if we didn't give Oklahoma their fair due. They beat us this year. And he's completely turned around that way. I mean, we beat them 49-0 last year, and he's completely flipped the script on us and quite frankly on the college football world. I know they've had a couple of bad runs in a row, but Venables is a good defensive coach, and I think it's only going to help his recruiting style in the SEC. On the beauty pageant's funny, and it is it's a big testament to the SEC. Like, iron sharpens iron, and they get the respect from the college football committee based off their schedule. So tailoring to that, right now it's weird that Georgia's too. It seems like they're not getting respect from what they've done in the past. Do you think that's fair? And do you think that's do you think it's a fair statement that I'm making, that they're not getting the respect? And then do you also think it's fair that they aren't getting the respect, and it's really just a singular look on what's going on this year?
Well, two things. It's been kind of interesting because I'm usually pretty decent at guessing some of the lines when they come out, and Georgia's been a couple of points off where you think some of these games would have been this year. No, it started to revert to form a little bit, but two things. I think that A, there's a ton of parity in college football. B, look, Georgia's really, really good. But they came into the season with a new quarterback, Stetson Bennett. It led them to so many big wins. Carson Beck sat on the bench for 3 years coming in. You just didn't know. Number two, and I know this every year, they lose 5 guys in the first round of the draft or whatever the number is. At some point, that kind of takes a toll. I mean, it kind of has on Alabama. So you're always like, okay, can they run this back again, or does it take a toll? I think the answer is it took a little bit off them. I was looking at some stuff this morning. They're getting up 4.7 yards a run play, taking sacks out of it. That is very un-Georgia-like. They don't have a Jordan Davis in the middle. They don't maybe have a couple things that they've had before. But look, they're still really good. There's 8-9 teams that could win this whole thing. I think they're right in the middle of it. They are getting better. I mean, if you look at power rankings and where teams are, these teams aren't more than a lot of them a point or two apart. Ohio State and Michigan, computers like a little bit more than everybody else, but you get into a pack where it's Georgia, Alabama, and there's not that many points off teams 3-8 or whatever it is. Washington might be the outlier a little bit, but because of that defense. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really good Georgia team. I think Georgia's probably going to win out and make the playoff. That'd be my prediction, but I don't offer it with a lot of confidence. And when they get there, you like your history and tradition, but I don't think it's quite the step on your neck Georgia team we saw the last couple of years.
Completely. I think interestingly, they play Ole Miss this weekend, right? So my expectation, and Ohio State plays Michigan State, right? Michigan State has not had a great year. My expectation would be that if Georgia beats Ole Miss, then they would then supersede Ohio State as the number one team ranked in the college football playoff ranking, the CFP ranking.
Well, you could be in a position too, Toss, where like Michigan goes to Penn State, and if they put the beat down, then aside the sign stealing scandal aside, like just from a purely team ranking standpoint, if Michigan comes in, to Death Valley and they beat or Happy Valley and they beat Penn State, then they could jump everybody.
Yeah,
they could.
We might see Ohio State flip to 3, right? Where
they totally could.
Quality win of the season. I mean, I'm with you, Chris. I think that there are 8 to 9 teams that could actually get it done this year. It's the most wide open that I've seen in a long time, but there's not a definitive top dog. And really, the only team that has looked the part in terms of blowing teams out with their offense and with their defense is Michigan, but their strength of schedule is so weak. Now these last 3 weeks really come down. I mean, it's really just 2 weeks. I mean, I hope they take care of business against Maryland, but Penn State and Ohio State are the 2 ones that you really have to, get off your back. But I'm with you. I think 8 to 9 teams, it's wide open. It's never been this much parity in college football.
If it is 9 for you guys, Chris, and for you, Nick, I'm interested to hear who that 9th team is personally. Because I think 1 through 8 makes sense to me, right? I'll just list them off real quick. Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, Washington, Oregon, Texas, and Alabama, to me, all feel like they could win the college football championship. Who is that 9th team that's kind of that I'm missing here? Or that's just not on my list?
No, I'm kidding. Not JMU. If it's all, it comes down if Ole Miss can beat Georgia this week. If Ole Miss can beat Georgia this week, then it's them.
Okay.
Did you say Penn State in there?
I did not.
I mean, it could. The computers. No, I'm not buying it, but the computers don't have Penn State off the rest of those teams. They've got their right in there with Georgia. Now, I don't think their offense is good enough.
Horrible.
But I'm just saying. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes the computers see something we don't see. I think it could be them. It could be Ole Miss. Ole Miss would have to win this weekend. If you want a complete dart throw, Louisville. I don't think I buy them as being good enough, but there's your contenders.
That's your dart throw. I don't think that's. I think that's a fair dart throw in the sense if they win the ACC, like, hey, look, they're a 1-loss ACC team, and that's presuming they took down Florida State, who's been in the top 4 all season long since beating LSU.
Yeah.
So having them in the mix is somewhat. I think it's more reasonable than Penn State. Like, I guess the score was kind of somewhat close in Ohio State, but their quarterback went 10 of 31. Like, their offense was non-existent. So you can't rationalize to me that a non-existent offense where, yes, like there are some really strong defensive teams, but go to the Pac-12. Like, what would that Washington team, Oregon team, they would boat race Penn State. I don't care if the Penn State defense, it has more pros on that side of the football. They will put up those points. So I really can't buy Penn State. Do you think that if Georgia runs the table in the regular season, gets the SEC championship, loses to Alabama, and then you have Bama with the 1 loss winning the SEC, but then obviously I think one of Michigan or Ohio State will be undefeated, and let's say FSU and Washington's undefeated. Is Georgia out?
I think so. We did a whole show about this for 50 minutes this week, and I was pretty busy at the end of it.
You could give us the skinny.
Well, here's the skinny. I went and I've got this model in front of me. I'm like, all right, if 2 weeks from now when this team matches up with this team, who's going to be favored based on home field? I just played it out and said, all right, if all the favorites win, here's what it's going to look like. Florida State was the easiest team to get to the playoff. Michigan is going to be favored by the computer in every other game. No, that helps by playing at home against Ohio State. No, they haven't played anybody yet. So how much stock you want to put in a computer when your toughest game is Rutgers? We can debate that, but I was trying to make it simple and say this is what it's spitting out. The other one was Georgia. Georgia's going to go unbeaten, and if it wins, it's favored in all the remaining games. Going to be, but you got a game at Tennessee next week. Probably going to be about a field goal line there. That's in Knoxville, and then you've got the Alabama game, which the computers have as almost a toss-up. I think I heard that the odds makers are setting that right now about Georgia -5.5. which seems a little high. But let Georgia win out. Okay, that's 3 unbeatens right there. That's easy. The 4th team, that's where it gets hard. I know Washington beat Oregon earlier in the year. Computers continue to like Oregon more because the defense is a lot better. What do you do with the Big 12? If Texas wins out, that's a great conversation. I mean, you could have a mess. Alabama would get eliminated in this scenario, but you could have a real mess where you're trying to go, okay, what do we do with an Ohio State team that lost 1 game that didn't make the championship game? What do we do with Texas if it's a 1-loss Texas that wins out? What if, Ole Miss losing would be part of that scenario, so throw them out. But I mean, there's a lot of combinations that could be really interesting at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the scary things as Texas fans, like, yes, it'd be awesome to go run the table for the rest of the way and win the Big 12 championship. But one of the scary things in the scenario that you laid out is Oregon seemingly gets to get their vengeance on Washington. You know, and they get to have their revenge game. And we don't necessarily get to have our revenge game against Oklahoma. The only savings grace, and I saw a video recently and we'll see how Oregon fares against USC now that Alex Grinch is gone. Maybe, like their defense does like a 180. Doubt it, but anything's possible. The only peculiar thing is there's so many teams in the Big 12 college football rankings, and they're making the rankings themselves. Like, they are saying and assessing, hey, the Big 12 has some real players and real dogs. They are really valuing Kansas. They're really valuing Oklahoma State. And so even if we meet Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship, like, that should count for something. Like, they're not, I think the value, there's 5 teams. Yeah. And I'm missing somebody. I think the value,
Kansas State.
Yeah, thank you. I think who we just beat. I think the value of the Pac without our starting quarterback, the value of the Pac-12 maybe not as high as people deemed it a couple weeks ago. So that's something peculiar that I'm watching out for, how the committee continues to value the Big 12, because it's pretty high with 5 teams in there.
Yeah, I mean, the one small rebuttal would be Arizona did sneak into the top 25 this week for whatever that's worth. They're not going to be in playoff contention, but maybe what that tells you is how's the committee going to value wins. So maybe there's a couple things in there at the end that give us a clue on how the committee is going to sort it out at the end. But yeah, it did feel like that flipped a little bit between the first poll and the second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and no one will know that Arizona is a good football team because they kick at 7:30 Pacific time. Right. The good riddance to the Pac-12. It's been a huge thing on our show for years. Like, the Pac-12 being it's so sad that they're like arguably one of the best, if not the best conference this year from a football, at least from a fun football standpoint, like fireworks, offense, like it's good football to watch, but nobody catches it because they play so late into the night on Saturday.
Yeah.
It's super brutal.
I mean, I'm waiting to see how all this Pac-12 stuff unfolds, because Washington does have a couple of tough games left on their schedule, counting the conference championship game. I mean, Utah is definitely not an easy win. Oregon State is not an easy win. They closed it out against Washington State, which is a rival. So, if they even get to the conference championship where they have to play someone, I mean, I think they rank these teams 5 and 6 for a reason, because they know that one of them is going to fall out.
Yeah.
They put them back to back, and they do the same thing with Michigan, Ohio State, right? Because they know that one of them is going to have to suffer a loss against the other, and they're going to have to drop them back a little bit. So I don't really mind the position that Texas is in right now. I'd like to be maybe one more, one ahead of Oregon. That's the one that scares me as well, because if they run the table, then, they just show right here that they're getting in ahead of us. But it just really depends on, who loses to who. Florida State, I mean, they could just walk in at this point, in my opinion. I mean, they do have some interesting matchups. I mean, Miami's definitely a rivalry week, and then Florida, but it just seems like they're going to walk in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like that's what happens. Like, and that's go back to the respect. And look, they are undefeated, but it goes back to almost the respect of the SEC. Like, when they came in week 1 and they beat down LSU, that put the rest of the league on notice. Like, the playoffs at that point was arguably theirs to lose. What's going on with LSU defensively? Maybe, like, what's the temperature you're hearing there? It's kind of a disappointing season. They could have arguably, and I think nobody's talking about this. Like, it's a very thank you, Heisman. Yes, I wasn't even going to mention that. He should definitely be going to New York at this point, Daniels. But they could arguably have the best quarterback wide receiver duo, like tandem, in the entire league, all of college football.
Yeah, that offense is incredible. The thing that happened to Daniels, I've been just kind of waiting on him to get hurt, and now although one of them could have happened to anybody, that the hit to the chin last week. I mean, that has nothing to do with stature, but he's not very big around, and he's got the ball in his hands a lot. They give up a few sacks. He runs the ball a lot, and I was like, is that going to be a little bit of a ticking time bomb? It kind of was, but guys, LSU before the season brought in new corners, and this kind of deep defensive back university. You just kind of presume LSU is going to have dudes there. It didn't. One of their starting corners was a transfer from Southeastern Louisiana. And you would still think that as much talent as they've got with Harold Perkins, with Mason Smith, with those guys, I mean, LSU's in a recruiting hotbed. You just kind of trust him to figure it out. I think alarm bells had to go off the first couple of weeks when they started giving up big numbers. They bring an 82-year-old in to help them midseason, Pete Jenkins, to try to help them figure stuff out. And there was a little spell for about 2.5 games where it got better. You know, like, all right, did it get better, or is it just playing Army and whoever else was in that stretch?
Yeah.
Second half of Missouri, they looked pretty good. Feels like last week against Alabama, we got our answer. Jalen Milroe is still running loose in that one, and that they couldn't get stops, and now they're out of the playoff chase.
I mean, he was frolicking around the field. Like, he was prancing and dancing around the field. They couldn't touch him.
But they had some DBs out in that game too, though, which I think is worth noting, right? No, it's really interesting. I completely agree with you on the Jaden Daniels point. And I think he changed his game slightly in comparison to last year. But I remember watching a lot of those games last year and being like, this guy, the hits that he takes when he breaks out of the pocket, and he's so athletic, but you just can't help it when there's a guy that, you know, catches up to you who you can't see out of your rear view mirror and hits you and is, you know, 50, 60 pounds up on you. Like, that's a lot of weight, and your body is crumpling in a weird position. And he's so athletic, and he's so good at making one guy miss. That change of direction oftentimes leads in him getting hit full speed by a different defender right after he's gotten 15 yards upfield. And I just think that's definitely something that a lot of pro scouts are keyed in on, you know, because at the next level, the guys get even faster, they get even bigger, and those hits get even, you know, a higher risk and potential for injury. So that is one thing. And it's unfortunate, like you said, like the one that he actually did get injured on, like that could happen to any quarterback, right? Like that's just, but it's been awesome to see what he's been able to do. And I guess with BK and those guys, you know, year 2, year 3 and 4 in between those seasons, you have to recruit better on the defensive side, and you have to have that depth, right? It's not just having the playmakers like Harold Perkins, who we were all a massive fan of, you know, when he committed to LSU and what he did last year as a freshman, but you have to have yes, right. Almost was a Longhorn, wish he was. But yeah, the depth there is different. I think it's really
huge.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that point quick before you get to your next one. A couple of things. Like it really is a big question if Daniels is a pro. Like, that's going to be a big question. Is he a second rounder? Is he a third rounder because of his size? Like, the talent's there, but from a size standpoint, and Bryce Young from a size standpoint isn't doing him any favors for whatever it is this season.
Yeah.
And you're right on the depth standpoint. Like, we're seeing it tenfold back to the Horns. Something that we talk about on our Texas show is the depth in our defensive backfield. Safety goes down, Catalan goes down, who's probably a pro too. Like, I was looking at our draft stock and our players. We probably have like 11 pros that could go next year in the draft, which is such an anomaly from what we've seen in years past recently. But look at the depth we have and how much that has helped us in our defensive backfield. So I just wanted to add that to your point before you get to the next one, Toss. Like, it's been such a massive boon for the Texas Longhorns this season, having safeties and corners that they can continuously rotate. And even if guys are healthy, like fresh legs all the time, with how talented some of these receivers in college football are getting and how fast, like exponentially growing that position is, having fresh legs in the defensive backfield is so important to having a strong college football team. And it's paid massive dividends for the Longhorns this year.
Yeah, completely agree. What I wanted to ask you, Chris, is with the expansion of the SEC, adding Oklahoma and Texas, and what we were talking about previously, just in regards to the college football playoff rankings, how these you know, the Big Five conferences are playing out at the end of the season. You know, the Pac and the Big 12, their conference championships are between the two best teams in the conference. The Big 10, you've got your divisions, right?
Stupid.
The SEC, you have your divisions. Now in the SEC, because the conference has been so good over the last 20 years, the West East matchup. It's a great matchup, right? It's been Georgia, it's been Florida on the East side. And then in the West, it's been LSU and Bama, and of course Auburn. It's been the right teams, right?
Well, we'll get the fix for Big Ten next year when Washington, Oregon, and USC join. They'll hopefully be in the right conference where they'll be able to play Ohio State or Michigan.
Right.
Yeah, that conference has been the most. I think that conference has benefited the most from conference realignment. They need
Iowa's probably going to be in the Big Ten championship, and that's a problem when we watch Michigan and Ohio State play one time. Like he's great, but I'd much rather watch those two teams play twice this year, and then that determine where we end up in the college football playoff rankings. So, give us again the breakdown of the new structure of the SEC and just what that's going to look like for Horns fans who are listening when they join the SEC conference.
Well, first of all, just an aside, not to throw a bucket of cold water on Texas coming to the SEC, because I think it's going to be fun. But I love the way the Big 12 did stuff, guys. I mean, everybody played everybody that's really the only way that you ever determine a true conference champion. And then everything went sideways, and they kind of had to adapt or die, and it is. But I like the fact that everybody played everybody. In the SEC, a lot of years it came down to, okay, you're playing in the East. It's an easier division than the West. You get in by default, and then in the West, if you didn't play one of the two teams in the East, it was really good in one of your two crossover games. That was that. And so I really love the way the Big 12 had it a few years ago, where you got the round robin, and unfortunately that's lost. You're going to have the 3 permanent opponents. I guess you're stuck on 8 games right now, and I guess it's a thing where coaches feel like the league beats up on itself enough without adding a 9th conference game. The league analytics, from what I've told, have told the ideal thing would be to go to 9 games. It's better for TV. I keep waiting, and look, maybe now that the playoff is 12 games, you'll see better games, because now it's not like, you lose a second game, doesn't matter how good you are. Like Alabama last year, lost 2 games on the last play, basically missed the playoff because of that. 12-team playoff, Alabama's in, no problem. I guess what I'm getting at here, I've always wondered when those crummy games are going away, when Alabama's playing Charleston Southern or whatever, just with all the TV money there for the taking. Yes, I mean, it just, TV dictates everything. I've always wondered when those games are going away. Well, coaches had those built in, so they can make a bowl, can keep their job, whatever. That whole dynamic of how that's going to play out in the coming years is going to be fascinating. The league knows it's better off going to 9 games, but you've got the coaches and the ADs sitting there not wanting to go from 8, and it's, people can call it chicken, whatever. It certainly makes for a less product, but I can get it too.
Yeah. I mean, you look, we already mentioned, right? FSU, that game against LSU at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
How impressive that now makes their credentials when the CFP is looking at them. For the Texas Longhorns, the reason why we're the 7th ranked team is because we beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. That's an out of conference game. Now, of course, I think maybe the bigger point is that, like, now that game's going to be in conference, and Texas is going to play LSU, and Texas is going to play Georgia, and like Texas is still going to play Oklahoma. And now we're looking at all of these games every single year that are at the highest of quality.
We get Michigan next year too, and that's going to add to the strength of schedule against the SEC.
So I'd say, like, why not have it at 9 games, right? Because those games are going to be high competition. A lot of people are going to watch, like you're saying, and push those teams at the top of the SEC to continue to schedule tough out of conference games. Like, we want to see the best play the best, and so do most viewers, right?
Well, I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you please go, please.
Well, here's the counterpoint to that. Okay, and I don't know who stands where in the room, but okay, let's say you're Florida. You end your season every year with Florida State. That's another game you got that's tough. Sometimes you get Miami in there too. If you're South Carolina, you end your season every year with Clemson. I don't know where it's going for Clemson from here, but they've been a top 5 program over the last 10 years. On a lesser level, you got Kentucky with the game every year with Louisville, which has sometimes been a top 10 program. So I can certainly understand the driving force between schools like those schools going, hey, wait a minute. We're playing 8 games, plus we're playing Clemson or Florida State, and now we get 9, so we get maybe 2 passes out against whoever we can schedule at that point. I mean, I don't like it, but I get it.
Yeah.
You got to look. The thing with Michigan, we're going to play them. If we're a great team, we're going to play them eventually. We're going to see them at some point. So why not get it to a place where it's advantageous? There's almost less in the line. Like when you meet them in the college football playoffs, yeah, you made it. That's great. But there's everything on the line in that game. Play them week, whatever we play in week 1, week 2, get it out the way. If you win, hey, like that's your resume in Ann Arbor next year. Like there may not be a better win in all of college football. Like that could be arguably the best win in college football, and we get that right out the gate. And then we have a little breathing room. Like the best thing if we had not played Alabama, let alone played them in Tuscaloosa and won, and we just had that OU loss with the same Big 12 schedule, I don't know if we're ahead. Like, where are we? Are we behind Penn State now? Are we talking about Texas like needing Penn State, Ole Miss, and like all these other teams to lose? Are we behind even Louisville? Like, is that where we're at? Like, we're not even in the top 7. We're not even in striking distance. So having these out of conference games and the strength of schedule, I think it's really advantageous. And we could kind of maybe teeter a little bit to basketball and get your takes on some of the hoops teams, because we'd love to know where to place our future money. I almost placed on a Michigan State. So glad I didn't do that.
Oh, goodness.
Thank you. I know it was almost a close call. But we'd love to know where to place it there. But I would say that, the biggest loser in all this outside of the Pac-12, of course, is the ACC, because what the Big 12 did losing us, bringing in Houston, a program like that, all of a sudden they might be the top dog in college basketball, the Big 12 going forward, with the way that program's been transformed. But I think even again in college hoops, it's going to be really, really fun with the way our program is, with the way the SEC basketball is kind of still like cementing itself as a very, very consistent league. So where does the money lie? Is it Kentucky? Is it Tennessee? Is it a team that I didn't list just there?
Man, the league is really good, guys. And I feel like I've said this several years recently, and some years I've been wrong, but I'm just looking at the transfers some of these teams at. Like Houston loses Tremont Mark to Arkansas, which is already going to be loaded under Eric Musselman. Yeah, he's one of the best defenders in the league. I mean, rinse and repeat with a bunch of other teams, because I feel like everybody in this league, for the most part, added dudes. I think right now, my head's been on Tennessee or Texas A&M to win the league. But for two reasons. Look what A&M did down the stretch last year.
Yeah.
And look at how many guys they returned. And I've done a deep dive on LSU. There are not a lot of teams that brought back guys. I mean, it's not like what we grew up with when you could say, oh, well, Georgetown's returning this guy next year, this guy this year, North Carolina doing and you knew the names and the faces every place. It's not that now. And so when you see a team that brings back a lot of dudes for a team that was good, you kind of sit up and that gets your attention. A&M is one of those teams. Tennessee's another one of those. I watched them opening night, and my concern for Tennessee, there's been two things that have really plagued them over the years. Number one, their offense bogs down in games. They can look great, and then they get to the NCAA tournament, and they will go through a stretch in the round of 32 where they cannot score for anything for 10 minutes.
Yes.
The Dalton Connect guy they got from Northern Colorado, it looks like the real deal. That I feel like that fills an answer for them. And so the guy Ziegler, their point guard who tore his ACL last year,
he's back.
I had questions. They say he's back, but I'm like, okay. Like, I'll give you a baseball analogy if you guys follow MLB. And I'm a Braves fan. Ronald Acuna, came back from that knee injury last year. The Ronald Acuna 2022 and the one of 2023 were different guys. And so sometimes a knee injury takes you a while to recover from. I don't want to make a sweeping judgment out opening night, but I watched him play a little bit. It looked like the quickness and aggression were there. He was kind of the engine that made them go. Not their best guy statistically, but he's a Brooklyn kid. He's a tough kid. He really gets into you and after you. That's what gave that team an identity. So I felt like Tennessee, I had A&M as my preseason pick based on hedging on Tennessee. I think I'd flip that now, but you got Kentucky. Those freshmen look great. Looks like they're going to defend again, which wasn't the case last year. I think Florida's a little bit of a sleeper further back. Arkansas, I could see Arkansas being good enough to win it all. They always peak in March. Alabama, we're sitting at media days. Nate Oates reminds us, hey, look, every year you guys pick us fifth. We've won it twice. They got Grant Nelson who looked great. I mean, this league is loaded. I'd say if you're looking for a team that people are sleeping on a little bit, it might be Florida because those other teams are getting a lot of run.
Yeah, I mean the transfers, the returning guy, like A&M bringing back Wade Taylor, like you're saying, like Tennessee running a lot of guys back. The Kentucky freshmen, we know how that train typically goes. Like sometimes it could take. Well, look, like we've seen with Calipari so many times. Like it takes a little bit. They could sometimes start a bit slow, but once like they metastasize and like kind of like grow together, right, and unite, then all of a sudden, once they get into March, they're lethal. Like what was Julius Randle's team? Like that's really dating it, but they were like an 8 seed.
Yeah.
Right. So they were an 8 seed, but how do they get to the finals? They're really good professional basketball players that took a while to gel. But it's so interesting.
Interestingly, they had the Harrison twins who weren't even that good of professional basketball players, but that team had a ton of size, which was a huge part of that roster. And obviously Julius is having a bad year this season, but he's been an all NBA player 2 times. So you're exactly right, Josh. Like we can't keep them out. You know, we can't expect that they won't be there at the end of it. But I don't know, that the Alabama thing, Nate's a great coach. There was just so much turnover on that roster. But I think it's a great point about Ziegler. Like his style of play also is very conducive to being fully healthy. Like he just like for him to be his best, he has to be fully healthy. And
so downhill,
and they'll need
so downhill.
He's super quick. Yeah. So it's a great point, Chris, about, you know, the guy always looking better in his second year back from the injury as opposed to his first year back. But I like to hear that Florida is a contender to win the SEC this year. That's fun and not something that we've seen in a while. And it was always great when they were in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, contender might be a little strong. I mean, we'll see, but I like what they added with Clayton. Riley Kugel really came out at the end of the year. Todd Golden is, you know, a coach a lot of people respect. I just think it's going to be a brutal league. I think they're going to have a hard time cracking that top 5 or 6. Auburn would be in there too, by the way. And Auburn, man, they had Baylor until they didn't. And they got a point guard who's phenomenal. I don't know. Most fun I guess I guess my point would have been more like those other teams get the attention. That might be one that doesn't get talked much about nationally.
Sure.
Sorry, I had someone blaring in the background. I was just saying Bruce Pearl's the most fun coach in college basketball. Watching him get like so crazy on the sideline week in and week out is just it's going to be such a joy to have him back. But yeah, it's really interesting points. I mean, looking at our Texas basketball team, like you brought up the Alabama team with Nate Oates, like they brought in that North Dakota State kid. That's a new transfer, right? That's like a really new piece they add. Like looking at our Texas team, like going down the line, like, you know, in game 1, like Horton, you know, Shedrick, Onyema, like Matt Amos, like our whole team is like pretty new. They're the transfer guys, but like college basketball has almost shifted away from like, hey, like let me get the hot incoming freshman, unless that kid is really, you know, like Zion Williamson level, but like let me get the hottest transfer. I need experience on this team, and let me bring that into my program, and you know, see and see how far we can go with that.
I mean, the interesting thing about like the Longhorns and the transfers that you mentioned, like Shedrick is coming from Virginia, right? Mm-hmm. That's a school that a lot of people are paying attention to. Big school, always good at college basketball. Horton, you know, he played last year at UCF, 2 years at Pitt before that, and he played at Delaware the year prior. Like that's the whole thing, Chris, to your point, is like it's so hard to keep track of who these kids are and where they're going. And I think the sport, the actual sport itself is so much better because these guys are all playing together and the quality of play is just rising all across the board. But from a notoriety standpoint, it's really hard to keep track of who these guys are, where they're going, you know, what year they are, what their eligibility is, especially with the current eligibility rules. It's like, you know, guys who play for 7 years, right? Like I don't even know what's going on at this point. And it takes a good 2-3 months to get into, okay, now I actually know my team and 5 other teams as well in college basketball. And so it's become a bit of a challenge. And I think in a way, college basketball is losing a sense to the NBA and the NFL and our pro sports and college football too, right? Like even those guys have helmets on, like we know those guys. We really do. I mean, look how much, and I know Caleb is a bit of an anomaly, but look how much he's being talked about right now in the media at large. So I don't know what the solution is, but I wish there was a way where we could know a little bit better of these players and these pieces in college basketball zeitgeist.
It's like NHL almost.
Yeah,
like, honestly, that's what it's been
I'm with
like.
you. Yeah,
it's been super tough.
We never lose fact of who the coaches are, right? Like the coaches have become almost more notable than some of these players, and these guys they're damn talented. They really are. Like it's a bit of a bummer for me.
I'd say the coaches and like the top recruits, right? Like your top 25 recruits in college basketball, in my opinion, because like they usually go one and done, and that's how you kind of get the name out. But it's the guys who, transfer 2 or 3 times that it's hard to keep up with. But
yeah,
I like the state that we're in. I mean, it's awesome that, for a long time, Texas has been playing in the Big 12, and it was such a competitive conference for basketball. And now, as it seems, we're going to the SEC, and I'm looking, and there's 5 or 6 teams that are in the top 25 right now. So I mean, we're heading to a really competitive conference, and I'm excited to see kind of what the play is like for us there next season.
I think the irony is like, when you bring up Texas A&M, Chris, and like you're talking about the strength of the SEC, Nick, in basketball, like our A&M rivalry might be renewed heavily, but on the court.
I have to ask Chris, because as Texas Longhorns, we always, look at Texas A&M as that weird school that's kind of culty, that has midnight yell and their yell leaders, and it's kind of an interesting team to root for, unless you're a I guess they call it red ass. What is the consensus with SEC fans on how they view A&M as a school?
I think it's about the same. I mean the sideline gymnastics of the yell, and no disrespect, I have friends. I mean, they're some of the nicest people, but it's a little different.
Yeah,
it's very
glad to hear that it's not just a Texas bias here, that we don't really see eye to eye on that.
It's very political answer, Chris. Nice.
The most of the SEC schools, like if you go to a football game at their home stadium, it's such a good time, even if you're not a fan of the team, right? If you're a fan of the opposition. Now you have to be careful who you're talking to, and you got to be careful how many beers the person has had that you're talking to. But it's like, it's an experience. I mean, Quan, our co-host on Horns Up, he was talking about how going to Alabama, like the production there, the production level, not on the field, I'm talking about off the field, in the stands at the stadium, is unbelievable. It's next level. A&M, I mean, I've been to Kyle Field, not since they made the new additions. It is a weird experience for someone of the opposition, because there's no music, right? Like the band, the away band is the only music that you hear, and it's just the yelling, and it's just the chants, and it's culty, like in a way, like Nick's saying. So it's something that's completely unique, and for that, like I appreciate it. But it's just a bit of a different vibe than the rest of the SEC, at least in the games that I've been to.
No doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for joining us, brother. Love your coverage. Great stuff. We'll have to get you on for baseball season, man. I know that's your specialty. I know you're, like we said at the top, you're a Vandy guy, and Vandy has produced some of the best product in college baseball and in MLB that we've seen over the past couple of years. So we'll get you back on for that. But thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate what?
Last question.
Oh, last question, man. We always ask
this question. If you're a guest on the Charity Stripe, you have to answer this. What is your favorite sports memory all time? And this could be from you as a player, as a fan, anything in life.
I've got 2, and I'll go in chronological order. I live in the Nashville area, so we got Titan season tickets when they got here, including the year they played at Vandy, which was very mediocre. Very unexciting. And then they get the new stadium. Everybody's excited. It finally feels like we got a team that second year. And so we go to the playoffs where we've got Buffalo the first game. And you guys know the story by now. Buffalo drives down the field against us, kicks a field goal with 20 seconds left or whatever it was. And we're going to shoot. And so I got season tickets with my 2 brothers and my dad. And my dad just looks at us. He says, and we're sitting in the upper deck. He says, guys, I'm out of here. He said, I cannot take this. Put my heart and soul into this, and I cannot stand to sit and watch another team take the field, with the celebration after the game. So the kickoff happens. We know what happens. Frank Wycheck throws the lateral to Kevin Dice, and then 68 yards later, they get a touchdown. Well, I'm sitting at it from an angle where I'm watching it and everybody's cheering. I'm like, ooh, that looked like a forward pass to me from where I sat. And so there's a 7-minute review in which I'm going, all right, everybody's excited, but I'm not really sure. So when they after that they announced that it was a lateral, then I lose my mind along with the rest of the stadium, and we're going crazy. So my dad is getting on the shuttle bus and knows none of this. He's turned off his radio and everything. And as he told it later, said, I hear a sound like the stadium has exploded. And he said, I just looked at the shuttle bus driver and said, what just happened? So I hate that Dad wasn't there with me for that, but it's always been a funny story.
You were at the Music City Miracle. That's crazy.
Yeah, I've got the ticket on the wall, and I think the other one. I've got a son who's 9. He's really into baseball. We're Braves fans, so he really got into it the COVID year. So 2021, we make that run through the playoffs, which was unexpected, and my wife let him stay up and watch Game 7 of the World Series with me. To the last out and watching him. And if you go to my Twitter, it's the post, the pin post. I recorded him reacting to the last out. And those are my 2 favorites because they involved great moments with my favorite team and my family. And that's kind of hard to beat.
Love that.
Nick, thank you for interjecting there and not letting me send Chris off without getting those 2 awesome, very family-oriented, heartfelt memories. I'm so sad your dad left early, but it's amazing that you got to see the Music City Miracle, and that's an awesome, awesome moment that I think so many.
That reminds me of. Have you seen Fever Pitch, where like he's a season ticket holder for the Red Sox? And like he never wants to miss a game, and the one game he decides to miss to go to like his girlfriend's friend's party or something, it's the 9th inning comeback where they come back from like 8 runs and his friend calls him. He's like, you just missed the greatest comeback of all time.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I've got one more for you, and I can't believe I didn't think of this based on who I'm talking to, but I saw one Nolan Ryan game in person in my life, and guess which one it was?
Perfect
no way.
I was at the Ventura game.
Ventura game.
Wow.
We made it a point. We're going to see Nolan Ryan pitch one time before he hangs it up, and that's the one we picked. So I saw that one in person.
What'd you think when it happened? What was your reaction?
We were in disbelief. My brother had dabbled with the idea of getting into photography and had just bought a really nice film camera. And so we're sitting in the upper deck. We purposely bought seats in the upper deck on the first row behind home plate so we could see Nolan Ryan do his thing from that angle. He could use his
long lens with the new camera that he got.
Well, right? He went down the field right before it happened. I mean, timed it just right. And so he goes down, and he'd barely gotten down there, and the fight breaks out. And so he's still got like 20-something pictures he shot with film. And most of them are blurry, but he got down there and he's like snapping pictures as fast as he can go.
That's unbelievable.
So my brother still somewhere's got a bunch of blurry images of the Nolan Ryan fight that nobody's got. And that was fun too.
That's really cool.
I had to go run and get this for you.
Yeah, there he is.
I had to go run and snag this. I have this not hung up yet.
Oh,
figured you appreciate that. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave the story, but I had to go get that to show you, man. That's a crazy one to be at. You've been at some really sick games, non-college football related, which is hilarious because that's what you cover.
Yeah.
Love that. Chris, really, man, thank you. We'll have to get you guys back on. Love what you're doing at Southeastern 14. Congrats on all the success there, and congrats on your amazingly crazy long tenure and great run at Rivals covering Vandy. Keep doing what you're doing, brother. Enjoy the rest of the season, and we'll see you soon.
Hey, it was fun. Thanks for having me.
Gotcha. Hook 'em horns, hit your free throws. We'll see you guys next time.